Hi, I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, host of Highly Sensitive Money. I'm a money coach, certified financial planner, and a highly sensitive person who brings money and social justice together. If you're someone who feels deeply, can endlessly think through how one decision affects everything else, or has ever struggled with all the things that traditional financial thinking leaves out, you're in the right place. In this show, I chat with highly sensitive people on how they handle their money, and with money experts on how they cultivate social justice in their work. Questions? Please go to allthecolors.net and schedule a free 30-minute call. And I'm happy to share resources on investment management, money coaching, workshops, or anything else money and social justice related. Join us in this episode as we explore money and sensitivity while honoring that all of our well-being is interconnected. In this episode, I'm continuing my conversation with Corinne Gardner, women's health and relationship coach and founder of Evulva Wellness. In part 2, we go deeper into what it means to trust ourselves, especially when it comes to money, identity, and the transitions that ask us to let go of what we thought we had to be. Corinne shares how insecurities can actually be gateways to our human potential, what it looks like to stop dousing our intuition, and how the journey out of nursing career became a pathway toward embodied self-advocacy. Welcome, Corinne, to the second part of our highly sensitive conversation. We're going to have a continuation of where we left off from the episode that came out 2 weeks ago, and also a further exploration of some new topics. So welcome back. And I think we have 2 questions to start off with. You mentioned in our last interview that, and again, for people listening to this first part, tune back to the previous episode where you'll hear Corinne talk about her upbringing, her introduction to money, the things that she learned about witnessing her family, witnessing the woman who cared for her, Pat, and just exploring her own sense of what makes sense with money. Today, we'll be expanding on a few points that we touched on last time. And one of the ones that I want to start with is you said that insecurities are a gateway to our human potential. Mm-hmm. Can you share more about what you mean by that?
Sure. It's so great to continue our conversation. Being aware of and elevating and understanding, and I say hydrating, different parts that have been insecurities or things that I've spoken about related to money, intimacy, boundaries, and self-advocacy throughout my 20s and now in my 30s. I can speak to seeing, oh, wow, all right, where spaces where I doubted myself or doused my intuition or initially had a perceived limiting belief can just be a space or area of growth that I shift from being so hard on or flagellating or assuming that I need to continue holding embarrassment for a certain amount of time. And I and other women really deserve a space to breathe and bring questions and receive support, feeling naturally it's okay to just not know or to not yet have the experience or understanding or to have iterated and tried whatever it is, communicating or advocating for ourselves and trying to express what felt aligned. And when we also outgrow that need or preference and choice to, in my life now, being like, all right, it doesn't have to be embarrassing or to view it as a choice I made from insecurity. And now I can lead with more understanding if I made a choice from a place of self-criticism or grounded self-expression.
I'm thinking about the example you shared about feeling comfortable with a job that paid $10 an hour and looking back and thinking, why was I doing that? That wasn't a livable wage. That wasn't really what I needed in order to care for myself and care for all of the things that it takes to live. And how would you bring this very specific example around money in your early 20s to this idea that our insecurities can be a gateway to human potential?
From high school, college, when I earned an hourly wage, the next dollar amount hourly was aspirational. And I could look back and feel embarrassed about that. And then recognize that slowing down and taking time and having conversations with people who really received questions around money and with whom I both felt safe and could expand in understanding and really receive feedback and go through and read and find different books and talk with you through our mentorship and understand the lens that I had around even the mask that I had in pretending like I was fine if I met or barely met my must-haves to pay rent, to pay bills. And I lived in Portland, Oregon in 2017 for a few years, compromised safety. And I grew up in a safe neighborhood, but I had the mindset after graduating from college that it wasn't an important aspect, and made decisions with low self-worth and a lens that my own safety and nourishing more than being in survival mattered. And over years, recognizing I naturally could expand and soften and shift the narrative that working hard or depleting or working to the point of exhaustion was how I earned a higher paycheck or could rest.
I'm hearing you look back on past decisions with a lot of gentleness and seeing how it was the right thing at that time, and you're learning past it, you're moving past it. And you also just talked to a different point that's just so tied up in the current system that we have about productivity being the most important thing over rest. And is that something that like you guide clients with, or how have you seen that be part of your own money journey of learning to bring more rest into your life?
Speaking so briefly to our first conversation and messages and the encouragement I received around money and being smart with money or financially well resourced was encouraged, but the models and women and caretakers who I'm also spending the most time with growing up had undermined themselves unnecessarily and really doubted their own capacity. And that came across in seeing women in my family dismiss or doubt receiving compliments, believing they weren't doing enough, continuing to do, and always hurry and do something for someone else before considering rest. And so I learned that as an avenue I replicated that in the positions I chose and ways of adapting to receive acknowledgement. Some of it was how I received validation and was able to make sense and really continue fulfilling a model of I will do whatever it takes to create income streams, even if the jobs are in unhealthy work environments with really gross management or mismanagement. And I feel really sleep deprived. So in my 20s, working a number of jobs, then afforded rest or feeling tight with money was familiar and a message that made sense at the time. And then adapting and shifting into grad school and training as a nurse, I chose to pursue nursing after working as a nurse's aide in the pandemic, and then worked in a hospital and really struggled with owning what I wanted. And when I sought out mental health support and was talking through, I felt this dissonance of what I discerned and what my intuition was guiding me to eventually claim. And I felt like being a wobbly giraffe. And hearing more language about nervous system regulation or emotional regulation it shifted from being a challenge and layer to really understand what that is and recognize that I could shift and consciously choose to move out of multiple misaligned relationships, friendships, a work environment. They were experiences where I needed to learn to get out or elevate myself, and that I could be more discerning. I remember having multiple conversations and with a woman who's a former nurse and then Ayurvedic practitioner. And in these conversations, I could feel and hear my body say one thing and my fear come through my voice that it would challenge what I had expressed my identity to be, my understanding of my earning capacity to be. And I, in 2023, just wrestled with this for months and ultimately decided to resign from a nursing position, seeing that being there for other people at the expense of my mental health or sleep and peace of mind felt so ironic. And I could eventually just own my agency before I started creating workshops and talking with other women about what well-being and embodied well-being or wealth could potentially feel like.
And it's such a common part. I feel like it's such a structural part of the current systems that most of us are living in, right? This like constant desire to produce and pretend that's all we're for. Like I work for someone else. I earn a wage, therefore I am. Like that's so limiting. And you're speaking to having the flexibility to being able to step away from that, to pivot into something else that makes more sense, that felt right at the time. And I know it's also a privilege. And I think a lot about, and I've shared before on the podcast about my own privilege to start my own coaching service, start my own business, and take a leap from a very well laid out plan that would have been wreaked havoc on me, especially as a sensitive person. Like I imagine I've shared this with you before, Corinne, but I remember thinking like, if I'm going to stay at this job, I have to start drinking more. And it was just such a big red flag of really, that's the coping strategy, that's what I'm going to do with my life now. And the job was great given what jobs are like. And I'm so glad I took this route. You mentioned also, as we were starting to prepare for the second interview, something about dousing our intuition, right? That when we're thinking about receiving, we sometimes douse our intuition. And by dousing, do you mean like we throw water on the flame, like we tamper it down?
Yeah. So I've started writing, and dousing came to mind with the energy of understanding and seeing when I've doubted my gut knowing or intuition, and feeling clear that really trusting what I needed didn't need to be explained to catch people up. And dousing came to mind when I recognized I was still holding residual self-blame for previous experiences that taught me what I've been referring to as nervous system Kegels, and that it would really take time to ground and rewire my own subconscious beliefs and see ways that I had and other areas of my life, from work and dating and intimacy, where I really fought for my own limitations. As an example, for years, it was like the ostrich effect, putting my head in the sand to feel capable of looking at money. I would set up a checking account or a debit and credit card and feel capable of going to a credit union, but I internally and subconsciously such a constriction and sense of disconnect with being, I was equating my personal self-worth for years with my wage. And over years that I was outsourcing power, permission, and self-worth to a sense of income or unfulfilling positions that I chose, I didn't yet understand that I was worthy of experiencing fulfillment and what that could be and what that could feel like, and that I could change my mind if I tried something and then realized that wasn't it. And then the fulfillment extends beyond waiting to be in a relationship. And I can definitely speak to how that plays into money, and speaking of values-aligned financial planning and communication across well-boundaried relationships and partnerships.
And I think it speaks across so many different areas of our life, right? Like when we're in that in-between stage of, I was talking with a few friends earlier this morning, and it feels like I'm demolishing an old structure, right? A structure that was limiting and that wasn't serving me, while at the same time building a new structure. And you could imagine, like, usually when you're building something, you're an architect, you don't demolish and build at the same time. That doesn't make any sense. And yet, as humans, that is consistently what we're going through. When we're in transitions, we're both tearing apart what no longer works while trying to imagine and envision what will work. And it's probably always like that in some aspect of our life, right? So moving with that discomfort of, I'm pushing aside those limiting beliefs that said, I have to be productive. I have to sacrifice my sleep. I have to do for others, even when I'm completely wiped out. And still navigating that. What does work look like? What does earning an income look like? What does providing services look like where I am well resourced?
Mm-hmm.
Like create, like working, managing with those things for people who are in that stage of in between. And I know that you're experiencing that stage in certain areas of your life. Like, what are ways that you sit with that you move with that?
I'm exploring this now for myself, and with your architecture analogy, have had a conversation recently, and in the liminal or the in-between or the ongoing phases where we feel there's something else we desire, but we don't know, or we don't know the how, or we're not sure what the steps are, to normalize that in architecture, for example, any doorway or passage is a threshold, and slowing down to actually honor where we are with acknowledgement, reverence, and even a reference to seeing that we can reflect on being where we are and capable. And if there's something new or a business that we're wanting to start or something that we're feeling conflicted about, our experiences have led up to where we are, and we all often feel really afraid or muddled and in the messy in between. And it's vital to find support and healthy, someone who can witness us, a friend and mentor or coach with whom we can express and say more than what is logical, and to massage or hydrate those parts that we were referring to earlier as maybe embarrassing or the insecurities in the threshold, and to be able to own it or at least acknowledge what we have already tried before envisioning, stepping into, or embodying the next highly chiseled person who we want to be is. And then that's okay. And think of like traditional healthcare and in hospitals, if we have really hurried interactions, the sense of disconnection and loneliness and dis-ease come with us to the next steps. And really, when we can express the humanness of being in between, or saying, or reflecting on, oh, I was dating and I thought that I really needed to close off and be guarded because I don't have my finances all together. And recognizing that actually I can own where I am and share that I'm navigating and fine-tuning different parts of my life, and my life can continue, and someone who I'm getting to know as a friend or intimately will also walk with me in the passage and in between. And the acknowledgement of ourselves can create this deeper capacity too within our nervous systems to see that we're inherently worthy of resting and creating space for non-doing or non-productivity.
And something that I touch on with all of my sensitive guests is, what do we do when we feel like we're too much, right? Here I have all of these additional requirements, right? They're additional, and I'm using quotation marks, because for us as sensitive, they're not really. They are the requirements that we have. And you talked about how we often will mask our sensitivity for fear of other people's judgments, right? And also the one point that you mentioned earlier is, as a healthcare provider, when you feel a sense of disconnection with a patient because you're so hurried, and then you move on to the next patient, you're bringing in this load from the previous glitchy interaction, glitchy connection. What's coming up for you as I say all this?
Love your question, and was like taking it in fully. Yeah, I was just like taking your whole question, and that's what I was just responding to. And what a contrast to be able to hear that now, or in a more spacious conversation. So it reminded me of what I've been able to create, to have these one-on-ones or these conversations in a different setting.
We've talked about how receiving is a skill, and I love how you connect money, embodied wealth, and pleasure, right, in your work as someone who guides people with intimacy. How do you see these two things, like receiving wealth, receiving pleasure? How do you see those two things be connected?
So Emily Nagoski is a researcher and a sex educator, and she makes an analogy of our gardens, or our sexual gardens that everyone has. And as we go through life experiences and relationships, we receive cultural, religious, and our caregivers model to us about what is good and bad and acceptable, and the curiosities that we can cultivate in the garden, and where we need to be self-censoring. And anyone who has a question and is on the edge of, wait, can I bring this up? This is something I'm wanting to clarify or I have a concern about. That could be related to sexual communication, and starting with any phase of a relationship and dating and asking for clarity. And then it can also play out in our advocacy when we are clarifying if a position we're working in or applying to really honors people who are on the team. And so there are just different aspects that and components that people receive. And these are all seeds and beliefs that are planted that wire our subconscious ability to access our voices and confidence to trust ourselves when we're in any conversation, to speak in real time, and also have the capacity to slow down and hear our intuition or our bodies say, this is misaligned, or this used to feel like this kind of compatibility used to feel aligned, but I've outgrown it and I'm desiring something that is more fulfilling or congruent or aligns with values that I've become clearer on. And the connection between pleasure and money and intimacy and sexual communication come back to agency and being able to hear ourselves and any partner we're with to redefine intimacy or create internal safety where we shift from judging ourselves or our partners when there's something that we're confused on or we're navigating how to bring to the table and to create space for. And when I mention redefining intimacy, pleasure is a word that can be triggering, understandably, because we view it as a unilateral, we equate it with sex and have the impression that pleasure extends only to penetration or to sex with someone else, but having the ability to just expand our view of what pleasure could be and allow ourselves to discern between the beliefs and the cultural messages we've heard to claim and understand or give ourselves space to challenge how we may have needed or wanted or desired something. And when we're thinking through, or we're in this threshold of, all right, there's something else that maybe I haven't defined it and I don't know, but something is really misaligned and I want to fine tune in my work life or my love life or repair communication in one area, to just catch when I say or when we say, okay, I feel stuck, or I had this conversation or created a business and feel like I'm just overwhelmed. And to say it and understand when we say what we're concerned about or needing or desiring, and then we give it a caveat, such as, but I don't know. And it makes sense. But before we even rush and say, I don't know, it makes sense to just process something and not know, recognizing, are we feeling incompetent, or is it also just understandably challenging to give ourselves space to access and experience pleasure without having a plan or needing to have an outcome?
That is such a powerful question, Corinne. Like, how can we allow ourselves to experience pleasure without having an outcome already in mind? And how does that compare to money? Like, how can we allow ourselves to feel wealthy and to feel, not even the word wealthy, but to feel well resourced? Right, especially when us as sensitives can feel like, well, how dare I feel resourced when so many people aren't? Like that can often be like especially for anyone with Catholicism in their background, like myself. But this brings us to one of the things that we had talked about as we were preparing for the conversation, is about going slowly, right? To learning to feel slowly with support, and that pleasure can actually expand our ability to be receptive. That is mind blowing to me. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah. So with the context of cultural, religious, societal expectations and messages that are planted in our gardens, and then we may not even be aware of, like these grow as distractions and weeds and then contaminate our ability to trust that earning work is a misnomer, and our desires and our ability to expand, and whether we feel confident about it or not, but to recognize that what we feel insecure about or are desiring more of that feels healthier, more aligned and congruent with our values and what we're wanting to step into, we may initially relate to as like, that's an insecurity, until it's integrated and we can feel safe in our bodies to be the resource, and a resource the safety and permission to challenge the narrative we have received in our upbringing, and of role play and caregiving and what that should look like, and how to really expand and give ourselves the permission that it isn't necessary anymore to neglect our needs and desires, and that desire isn't dangerous, but really can guide us to attune to our bodies more and more when we practice pleasure beyond masturbation, but just ask ourselves, what am I needing? And that could be water to masturbation, but also to soothing ourselves and to reframe the narrative that being single is something we have to hurry ourselves through to make our sense of to be whole, and practicing connecting with what our hearts and our minds and our bodies need, and nourishing ourselves, whether we are in relationship and partnership or not, is an invitation to attune to what aligned pleasure can be, and that can change for us.
Right. And connecting this, like following the thread of like receiving pleasure, receiving wealth. In our previous conversation, we talked so much about seeing women in your surroundings not like trust their own brilliance when it comes to receiving pleasure and owning our ability to produce wealth, to be financially self-sufficient, have enough. We talked about like the martyrdom that can come, right? That really limiting part of like the inherited scripts that we have of being likable, of shrinking our desires. What are some of the ways that you help people move through that, or that you've experienced moving through that?
I am navigating and just refining and even deepening in my own trust of my intuition right now. So I'll speak to how I walk with women, and I'm so passionate about listening to women. And slowing down and hearing your question of thinking about ways that I'm fine-tuning that right now for myself, and recognizing when I qualify or explain choices to myself. If I'm like, oh, I made a choice because what I was thinking and envisioning what I thought would create a sense of safety, security. And that could have been in taking a position that I felt and intuited was just in working 14-hour shifts, 12 to 14-hour shifts, and knowing that night shifts were necessary. And it really compromised what I had the desire to do, let alone like what I was feeling clear I could say no to. So when you speak of martyrdom, it was later when I started to voice and pause and see my own dissonance of working as a nurse, but presenting myself as a nurturer, and thinking that martyrdom, and I'll just pause, that it can just be a choice. People who work extensive long shifts and who work night shifts may not feel like that's at the expense of their health, but I just knew it was misaligned and I wanted to step out of that. And it really felt so overwhelming. And multiple times I just went into this experience of freeze in my body before I trusted that what I needed was enough to move in that direction and shift from colluding to what was familiar.
And as we start to come to the end of our second conversation today together, I wanted to ask to end on one beautiful question. What is a small practice someone can start today to become more receptive in their finances and in their sensuality?
An invitation that I have practiced and then I offer to women is to allow yourself to hear someone really give you an authentic compliment and to receive it without throwing it back. So a simple practice to expand wealth consciousness is really trusting that in the areas of our lives and our bodies and relationships where we feel challenged and want to hold on to and fight for our limitation of, oh, that felt so good, but I can't ask for that again. Or I love making money, but I'm not sure how. So immersion and connecting with people with whom we are shifting and are seeing are expansive or wealth expansive or seem to be healthy people, allow yourself to hear and really take in compliments in a day-to-day. Like, you really give a great talk, before throwing it back, and then to acknowledge and allow yourself to hear that, to integrate it, so that you also know you can take up space in your own body and expand in where you envision yourself to be, and to let your desire be directional to different spaces where other people who you admire in any capacity. It could be people who've flourished in any area that speaks to you, be people who can reflect your brilliance back to you.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Opening that receptivity and growing your tolerance for joy too. Becoming comfortable with that. Well, Corinne, it's always such a pleasure to get to talk with you, and I'm so happy that we're getting to share our conversations with other people who listen. I'll include your website in the show notes. I'll include contact links in the show notes. Anything else that you'd like to add before we close?
I feel so much joy in talking with you, and that I am walking alongside other women and more inclusively people who identify as people with vulvas beyond the cisgender female identity, to normalize that as we redefine the relationship to ourselves and our ever evolving relationships to what we're needing and wanting, that we don't need to be lone wolves. And I have worn different professional hats and can speak to the ongoing growth edges that I'm working through, but just want to add that I've been introduced as a women's health and wealth expert at times, but it's really walking alongside women, and I have more questions than answers. And it's really an honor to talk with you and share an excerpt of my story and to connect with other women when it resonates.
I love it. Thank you. You remind me of, there's this really famous quote from Rainier Maria Rilke that we must live into questions, right? And that'll guide us to our answers, and to know that those are evolving. Thank you.
And that's how we met.
That's how we met. I love Corinne's invitation to hydrate the parts of ourselves we've been neglecting, to stop throwing water on the flame of our own knowing, and to move toward a version of wealth that actually includes us, our bodies, our boundaries, our pleasure, and our peace. Corinne speaks to the real cost of caring for others at the expense of ourselves, and the beautiful act of choosing differently. It's such a pleasure having Corinne join us for the second part of our interview. Her warmth, her honesty, and the way she holds space for women navigating their own conscious pivots is heartwarming. Thank you for joining me on Highly Sensitive Money. I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, and I hope this episode helped you see how money and sensitivity can work together while honoring our interconnected well-being. We have the power to create a system where everyone's needs are met, because nature is abundant. If you found value in today's conversation, please take a moment to leave a review and share this episode with someone who could benefit. Your support helps this message reach more people navigating their own financial journeys. A thank you goes to Mike Schul for the music and Juan Antonio Nunez for producing. For more resources on bringing money and social justice together, sign up for my monthly newsletter over at allthecolors.net. I also invite you to schedule a free 30-minute call where we can talk about money coaching, investment management, and all things money and social justice. Until next time, remember that your sensitivity and deep thinking is your superpower.